On his first blind date, a millionaire discovered she was paralyzed. What happened next will melt your heart. They first connected by a wrong call, and 2 years later, destiny brought them face to face. I promise this will be the most beautiful story of your life. If you skip it, it will break my heart, and maybe I'll stop writing forever. Today the intro is very short because I can't afford to lose you. I love you. If you don't like the intro, you can skip it, but please don't leave the story. Hi, my beautiful family. Today my heart is heavy. My first cousin passed away from a heart attack brought on by financial struggles and a lack of peace at home. This tragedy reminds me, and I pray it reminds you, that life is fragile and precious. Please, my family, don't let stress and anger destroy the gift of love. Be gentle with your partner, show patience, hold your children close, and let kindness rule your home. True happiness isn't in wealth, but in love, respect, and peace with those closest to us. I share this pain because you are not just an audience. You are my family. Every word I speak and every story I tell comes from my heart to yours. When you watch, when you stay, when you support, it gives meaning to my work and strength to my soul. Please don't let my hard work be in vain. Stay with me to the end, because together we heal, together we grow, and together we remain one strong family. If your heart is true, right, present. If your love is real, right, I am with Mr. Peter. Sometimes the most beautiful love stories begin with the smallest accidents, and the deepest connections are forged in the space between hello and goodbye. The rain drummed against Linda Garcia's window, like fingers tapping an impatient melody, each drop a reminder of another evening spent alone in her Phoenix apartment. At 22, she had grown accustomed to solitude, but tonight it felt heavier than usual, pressing against her chest like a weight she couldn't quite shake off. Her wheelchair sat positioned perfectly beside her desk, where scattered sketches of faces she'd never met told stories of lives she'd never live. The apartment was silent except for the storm, filled with the careful accommodations she'd made to create independence in a world designed for others. Lowered countertops, ramps instead of steps, everything within reach from her seated position. It was functional, efficient, and utterly lonely. 12 years had passed since the accident that took her mother and her legs in one devastating moment. She could still remember every detail, the screech of brakes, the moment of weightless terror, waking up to discover that her mother was gone and her own body had become a stranger. 12 years since her father had chosen grief over presence, remarrying a woman who provided meals and clean laundry, but never warmth, never the gentle touches and whispered endearments that had died with her mother. Linda had learned to find beauty in small things, the way afternoon light danced across her canvas, the satisfaction of completing a design project, the rare moments when her art touched someone's heart. She'd built a life around these fragments of joy, telling herself they were enough. But love, real, consuming, soul-deep love, that seemed as impossible as walking again, a dream she'd carefully packed away like her mother's jewelry, too precious to discard, too painful to examine closely. Her phone pierced the evening quiet with its sharp ring, cutting through the melancholy like a blade through silk. Expecting another potential client discussing logo designs or wedding invitations, the bread and butter of her small but growing business, Linda composed herself and answered with the practiced professionalism that had become her shield against a world that often forgot she existed. Garcia Design Studio, this is Linda speaking. Finally, I've been trying to reach the pottery studio for an hour, and I'm starting to think the universe is conspiring against me. The voice that flowed through the receiver was unlike anything she'd ever heard, deep and warm like aged whiskey, with an undertone of frustrated exhaustion that somehow made it more human, more real, more achingly attractive than any voice had a right to be. Is this Desert Dreams ceramics? Something in his tone, a combination of weariness and hope, sophistication and vulnerability, made her pause. Most wrong numbers were brief, apologetic, quickly dismissed. But this voice carried weight, history, the kind of loneliness that recognized its echo in another person's silence. "I'm sorry, you have the wrong number. This is a graphic design studio, not a pottery place." Linda's finger hovered over the end button, poised to return to her solitary evening, but something mysterious and powerful stopped her. Maybe it was the genuine disappointment in his sigh, or perhaps the loneliness in her own heart, recognizing its twin in a stranger's voice. Maybe it was simply that, for the first time in months, someone had called her who wanted nothing from her except a simple answer to a simple question. "Damn. I'm in Sedona for the week trying to find somewhere to clear my head, and I can't even get a simple phone call right." He paused, and she could hear the sound of rain on his end too. "I'm sorry for bothering you. Have a good evening." Wait. The word escaped her lips before her mind could catch it. "You're in Sedona? It's beautiful there. I can hear the rain on your end too. Must be the same storm system." "Yeah, it's coming down pretty hard here. Though I have to admit, the red rocks look incredible in this weather, like they're glowing from within." His voice carried a note of genuine appreciation that made Linda smile for the first time all day. "I've always wanted to see Sedona in the rain. I imagine it's magical." She found herself settling deeper into her chair, the phone warm against her ear. "It is. I'm Mark, by the way. Mark Ellison. And I should probably thank you for not hanging up on a complete stranger who can't dial a phone correctly." Linda Garcia. "And honestly, your wrong number might be the most interesting thing that's happened to me this week." She laughed softly, surprised by her own honesty. "Tell me something, Linda Garcia from the design studio. What do you see when you look out your window right now?" The question was simple, but the way he asked it, with genuine curiosity, as if her view mattered to him, made her heart skip. City lights blurred by raindrops, like watercolor paint running down glass, and palm trees bending in the wind, looking like dancers who've forgotten their choreography. His laughter was rich and unguarded. "That's beautiful. You paint with words the way most people paint with brushes. I actually do paint and design. It's how I make sense of the world, I suppose." She found herself sharing more than she intended. "What about you? What brings you to Sedona?" Running away from a life that looks perfect on paper but feels empty in reality. You know that feeling when you have everything you thought you wanted, but you'd trade it all for something real. His honesty was startling, vulnerable in a way that made her want to reach through the phone and offer comfort. "I know the feeling of wanting something more, something deeper than what's right in front of you." Linda's fingers traced the edge of her sketchbook, where half-finished drawings of couples holding hands mocked her with their completeness. For the next hour, they talked about everything and nothing. Mark told her about his failed attempts at pottery, his secret love for old movies, and his dream of finding someone who saw him for who he was beneath the surface. Linda shared her passion for art, her love of thunderstorms, and her belief that the most beautiful things in life were often the most fragile. Neither mentioned the details that defined their daily existence, his penthouse and boardrooms, her wheelchair and isolation. In the space between their voices, they found something neither had experienced before: recognition. Two souls discovering they spoke the same language of longing. "I should probably let you go," Mark said as the conversation naturally wound down. "But Linda, this has been the best wrong number I've ever dialed." "I'm glad you're a terrible phone number dialer, Mark Ellison." She meant it more than she'd meant anything in years. "Can I Would it be completely insane if I asked to call you again tomorrow? Same time? Linda's heart hammered against her ribs. She thought of her empty apartment, her predictable routine, her carefully constructed walls that kept the world at a safe distance. Then she thought of his laugh, the way he'd listened to her describe rain-blurred lights, as if she'd shared the secret of the universe. "I'll be here," she whispered. "Until tomorrow then, Linda Garcia. Until tomorrow, Mark Ellison." After the call ended, Linda sat in the growing darkness, her phone still warm in her hands, like it held pieces of his voice. The storm outside was beginning to calm, but inside her chest something was stirring to life, something dangerous and wonderful and completely terrifying. She replayed every moment of their conversation, the way he'd listened to her describe rain, as if she'd shared the secret of the universe, the way his laugh had made her feel beautiful without him ever seeing her face. For the first time in 12 years, she allowed herself to imagine what it might be like to be loved, not despite her limitations, but simply for who she was. The thought was so foreign, so impossible, and yet so desperately wanted that it made her chest ache with longing. She rolled to her bedroom window and looked out at the city lights blurred by the last drops of rain. Somewhere out there, maybe, was a man who could love a voice before a face, a heart before a body, a soul that had learned to find beauty in broken things. Little did she know that in New York, a man she'd never met was staring out at the same storm, wondering if it was possible to fall in love with a voice, and if tomorrow's call would prove that some of the most beautiful things in life began with the simplest mistakes. In Sedona, Mark Ellison stood at his hotel window, phone still in his hand, his reflection ghost-like in the rain-streaked glass. For the first time in years, he was actually looking forward to tomorrow, counting the hours until he could hear that voice again, that laugh that had made him remember what it felt like to be fully alive. Chapter 2. Voices in the dark. In the spaces between words, in the pauses between thoughts, love finds its way into the most carefully guarded hearts, transforming strangers into soulmates, one whispered confession at a time. Mark Ellison had built an empire on perfect timing, every decision calculated with precision that would make quantum physicists weep with envy. Every meeting, every deal, every minute of his day was orchestrated with mechanical efficiency that had earned him billions but cost him his humanity. But at exactly 8 p.m. Mountain Time, he found himself abandoning boardrooms and conference calls, dismissing assistants with unprecedented urgency to sit in his Sedona hotel room, phone in hand, waiting for a woman whose face he'd never seen, but whose voice had become the soundtrack to his dreams and the rhythm by which his heart now measured time. It had been 3 weeks since that first wrong number, and their nightly conversations had become as essential to him as breathing, as necessary as the sunrise that painted the red rocks outside his window each morning. Tonight, as he dialed her number with the same anticipation that had carried him through 21 previous calls, Mark realized he was falling in love with someone who existed only in words and laughter, in shared silences and whispered confessions that felt more intimate than any physical touch he'd ever experienced. The hotel room itself had transformed over the weeks, no longer the sterile, temporary space of a business traveler, but a sanctuary where he could shed the armor of success and simply be Mark, not the CEO, not the billionaire, just a man who had found something precious and was terrified of losing it. "Hello, stranger." Linda's voice filled the room like warmth flooding a cold house, chasing away the shadows that seemed to gather whenever they weren't talking. "Hello yourself, beautiful voice." Mark smiled, settling into the chair he'd begun to think of as theirs, the one positioned perfectly to catch the evening light that reminded him of the gold flecks in eyes he'd never seen but could picture with startling clarity. "How was your day?" Linda curled deeper into her favorite corner of the couch, the phone cradled against her ear like a precious secret, her free hand tracing absent patterns on the soft throw blanket that had become part of their ritual. She'd found herself preparing for these calls like dates, choosing comfortable clothes that made her feel beautiful even though he couldn't see her, lighting candles that cast dancing shadows on her walls, creating an atmosphere worthy of the magic they built together each night. "Better now," she said, and meant it in ways that still surprised her with their intensity. "Mrs. Chen loved the wedding invitations I designed. She said they were so beautiful they made her cry happy tears." "Of course they did. You have a gift for seeing beauty where others see ordinary, for finding the extraordinary in moments that most people would dismiss as mundane." Mark's voice carried that note of genuine admiration that made her feel like the most fascinating woman in the world, like someone worthy of the kind of love songs that had always seemed written for other people. "Tell me about them. Paint the picture for me." "Cherry blossoms against midnight blue with gold calligraphy that looks like stars scattered across the sky," she began, her voice taking on the dreamy quality that always emerged when she talked about her work. The bride wanted something that captured the feeling of her grandmother's garden in Taiwan, the place where she fell in love with the idea of forever. "I spent hours getting the brushstrokes just right, trying to capture not just the flowers but the emotion behind them, the weight of promises that would last lifetimes." "I can picture them perfectly," Mark said, his voice soft with wonder. "You don't just design invitations, do you? You design dreams, capture hope in ink and paper, create portals to the most important moments of people's lives." Her laugh was soft and genuine. "What about you? Conquer any business empires today?" Mark hesitated, the way he always did when their conversations touched the edges of his real life. He'd told her he worked in business, kept it vague and general. How could he explain that he owned 3 companies, had more money than he could spend in 10 lifetimes, and would trade it all for the ability to hold her hand? "Had a meeting that ran long. Spent most of it thinking about this call, if I'm being honest." "You can't keep abandoning your responsibilities to talk to random women you've never met," Linda teased, though her heart sang at the thought of occupying his mind during busy days. "You're not random. You're—" He paused, searching for words that could hold the magnitude of what she was becoming to him. "You're the reason I understand why people write songs about love." The admission hung between them, beautiful and terrifying. Linda felt tears prick her eyes because no one had ever spoken to her like this, like she was precious, like she mattered beyond her usefulness or productivity. "Mark," she whispered, his name a prayer on her lips. "Too much?" His voice carried a vulnerability that made her want to reach through the phone and wrap her arms around him. "Not enough," she admitted, the truth escaping before fear could catch it. They talked about childhood memories that night, Mark's lonely birthdays in boarding schools where nannies pretended to care, hired smiles and expensive gifts that couldn't fill the void left by parents too busy building legacies to build relationships with their son. Linda's perfect 10th birthday, when her mother had painted her fingernails purple and they'd eaten cake for breakfast, dancing around the kitchen to Spanish songs that made everything feel like celebration. They shared dreams that felt too precious to speak aloud in daylight, fears that seemed less overwhelming when whispered into phones in the darkness, favorite books that had shaped their understanding of what love could be, worst heartbreaks that had taught them to guard their hearts until the right person came along with the key. "I keep wondering what you look like," Mark said, as the conversation wound toward midnight, his voice carrying a vulnerability that made her breath catch. "I dream about you, you know. Have whole conversations with a woman whose face changes every time I try to focus on it, but whose voice never wavers." Linda's breath caught, and she felt that familiar clenching in her chest that came whenever their conversations approached the inevitable collision between fantasy and reality. This was the moment she dreaded most, the question that would eventually demand answers she wasn't ready to give. In his mind, she was probably tall and graceful, someone who could dance and run and move through the world without barriers. Someone worthy of the pedestal his voice placed her on each night. The truth felt like a betrayal of the woman he'd fallen for, a revelation that would shatter the magic they'd built, word by careful word. I'm not what you'd expect, she said carefully, her voice smaller than usual, weighted with secrets that felt heavier each passing day. Try me. I have long black hair that I keep in a braid because it's easier to manage. Brown eyes that my mother used to say were like coffee with gold flecks. I'm shorter than average. The half-truths felt like stones in her throat. You sound perfect. If only you knew, she thought, hating herself for the deception, even as she treasured these moments of being seen as whole. What about you? She asked, deflecting attention from herself. 6'2", dark hair that never behaves, green eyes, and a scar on my chin from falling off my bike when I was 7. I smile more when I'm talking to you than I have in years. Linda closed her eyes, building his image in her mind, adding it to the collection of dreams she'd never dared to hope for. I wish, she began, then stopped. What do you wish? I wish we could meet. The words terrified her even as they escaped, because they were true and impossible in equal measure. What's stopping us? Everything. My wheelchair, your inevitable disappointment, the way love stories like this don't happen to people like me. Distance. Timing. Fear that reality might not live up to the magic we've found here. Magic, Mark repeated thoughtfully. Yes, that's exactly what this is. And Linda, I don't think reality could disappoint me. Not when it comes to you. They said goodbye reluctantly, as they always did, promising tomorrow's call like lovers promising forever. Mark hung up and stared at the Sedona night sky, wondering if it was possible to love someone completely without ever touching them. In Phoenix, Linda lay in her bed, staring at the same stars, wondering if she was brave enough to risk losing the most beautiful thing that had ever happened to her by revealing the truth. Neither of them slept well, but both of them dreamed of voices in the dark and love that transcended physical space. Tomorrow's call would bring them closer to a crossroads neither was ready to face, but some journeys toward love require walking through fear to reach the light on the other side. Chapter 3. When silence speaks louder. Sometimes the absence of a voice can echo louder than any words ever spoken, and the fear of loss can illuminate the true depth of love. The ceramic coffee mug shattered against the bathroom floor like Linda's heart had shattered against the reality of her limitations. One moment she'd been transferring from her wheelchair to use the facilities, a routine she'd performed thousands of times with practiced efficiency. The next, she was staring at the destruction of more than just a simple household object. Her phone lay among the ceramic pieces, its screen cracked beyond repair like a spider web of broken promises, its silence more devastating than any goodbye could ever be. The irony wasn't lost on her. She'd spent years adapting to live independently, learning to navigate a world designed for others, and now, a simple slip of concentration had cost her the most precious thing in her carefully constructed life. She stared at the broken device, remembering how warm it had felt against her ear during their conversations, how it had become a lifeline to a happiness she'd never expected to find. For 5 days, Mark Ellison's voice had been absent from her world, and the quiet was deafening in ways that made her understand, perhaps for the first time, just how deeply she'd fallen. Every evening at 8 o'clock, she found herself sitting by her silent landline, her heart racing with muscle memory of anticipation that had nowhere to go. The apartment felt different without their nightly ritual, larger and emptier, filled with conversations that would never happen and laughter that echoed only in her memory. She'd tried everything with the desperate determination of someone whose lifeline had been severed without warning, called her service provider from her stepmother's phone multiple times, only to learn her device was beyond repair and that retrieving contacts from a phone with a completely shattered screen was impossible. Searched online for any trace of Mark Ellison using every combination of keywords she could think of, finding hundreds of men with that name scattered across social media and business directories, but no way to identify her Mark among the strangers. Her Mark who talked about pottery and red rocks and the emptiness of having everything but meaning. She'd even considered calling every hotel in Sedona, but realized with crushing despair that she didn't know his last name well enough to be certain, didn't know where he worked beyond the vague descriptor of business, didn't know anything concrete about the man who had become her entire world. He was a voice, a laugh, a presence that had filled the empty spaces in her life. But in terms of finding him in the real world, he might as well have been a beautiful ghost. The broken phone pieces sat in a shoebox on her nightstand, carefully collected as if she could somehow reassemble both the device and the connection it had carried. She'd touch the fragments sometimes, running her fingers over the cracked screen that had once displayed his contact information, remembering how warm the phone had felt against her ear during their conversations. On the fourth day, her stepmother found her crying over the broken pieces she'd carefully collected in a shoebox, as if she could somehow reassemble both the phone and the connection it had carried. The fragments seemed to mock her with their sharp edges and black screen, a physical representation of how quickly happiness could shatter, how fragile the most precious things in life really were. "It's just a phone, Linda," Carol said with her typical emotional distance, the words delivered with the casual dismissiveness of someone who had never experienced the kind of love that made breathing difficult when it was absent. "Buy a new one." "I don't have the money right now. The client payments haven't come in yet." Linda's voice was raw from crying, hollow from the kind of grief that comes from losing something precious and irreplaceable. Not just a phone, but a connection to the only person who had ever made her feel completely seen and valued. "And it's not about the phone. It's about him. It was just some guy you talked to. You'll find another one," Carol said, with the brutal pragmatism of someone who had never understood that love, real love, wasn't something you could simply replace like a broken appliance. "It was just some guy you talked to. You'll find another one." But Linda knew there would never be another Mark. There would never be another voice that made her feel beautiful, another man who listened to her thoughts as if they were music, another connection that had made her believe in love again. Meanwhile, in New York City, Mark was coming apart at the seams in ways that terrified him with their intensity. He'd returned from Sedona, expecting their nightly ritual to continue, only to be greeted by silence that felt like a physical presence in his penthouse. The space that had begun to feel warm with the promise of shared happiness now echoed with emptiness that no amount of expensive furniture could fill. The first night, he'd assumed she was busy, maybe a client emergency, a family obligation, something temporary that would resolve with tomorrow's call. The second night brought worry that gnawed at his concentration during meetings, making him check his phone obsessively for messages that never came. By the third night, he was calling every hour, leaving increasingly desperate voicemails that she'd never hear, his voice cracking with emotions he'd never allowed himself to feel. "Linda, it's me. Are you okay? Call me back. It's Mark again. I'm worried. Please just let me know you're all right. I don't know what happened, but whatever I did wrong, I'm sorry. Please don't disappear on me. This is pathetic, I know, but I can't stop calling. Your voice has become the best part of my day, and I don't know how to go back to the person I was before I found you." His assistant noticed the change immediately. The man who ran board meetings with laser focus now stared out windows during presentations like he was searching for something he'd lost. The CEO, who never missed details, was forgetting appointments, mixing up names, losing track of conversations mid-sentence, as if half of his attention was always elsewhere, always listening for a phone that refused to ring with the voice he needed to hear. "Sir, the Morrison contract needs your signature," his assistant Jennifer said, placing papers on his desk. "What?" Mark looked up as if surfacing from deep water. "Oh, right." He signed without reading, his mind elsewhere, lost in the memory of laughter that had become his reason for breathing. By the 5th day, Mark had made a decision that would have seemed insane to anyone who knew him. He was going back to Phoenix. He was going to find her. Linda sat in her wheelchair in the garden behind her apartment complex, watching children play on equipment she'd never be able to use, when a boy of about 10 approached her hesitantly. "Are you Linda Garcia?" he asked, clutching an envelope like it contained state secrets. Her heart stopped. "Yes." "A man gave me $20 to deliver this to you. He's waiting by the Red Rocks in Sedona." The boy handed her the envelope and ran off before she could ask questions. With trembling fingers, Linda opened the envelope. Inside was a single sheet of paper covered in handwriting she somehow knew belonged to Mark, even though she'd never seen it before. "My dearest Linda, I don't know why you stopped answering my calls, but I can't accept that our story ends with silence. I've spent 5 days in hell, wondering if you're safe, if I said something wrong, if you've decided that whatever this is between us isn't worth continuing. I'm in Sedona, at Bell Rock, where the sunset turns the whole world the color of hope. I'll be here tomorrow at 6 p.m. If you come, we can finally put faces to the voices that have saved us both. If you don't come, I'll understand. But I'll never stop remembering the woman who taught me what it means to fall in love with someone's soul. You said once that you believe the most beautiful things in life are often the most fragile. What we have is both beautiful and fragile, but it's also real. More real than anything I've ever known. Please come, Linda. Let me see the face that belongs to the voice that owns my heart. Forever yours, Mark." She read the letter 7 times before the words fully penetrated. He was here, in Arizona, waiting for her. The terror that seized her was immediate and overwhelming. How could she go? How could she roll up in her wheelchair and destroy the image he'd built of her? How could she watch love die in his eyes when he realized the woman he'd fallen for was broken, incomplete, bound to wheels and limitations? But how could she not go? How could she let the most beautiful thing that had ever happened to her end without at least being brave enough to show him who she really was? That night, Linda lay awake staring at the ceiling, holding the letter against her chest like a talisman against despair, like a bridge between the woman she'd been and the woman she might become if she could find the courage. Tomorrow would change everything, one way or another, and the weight of that knowledge made sleep impossible. Either she would lose the love of her life to the harsh reality of her limitations, or she would discover that some love was strong enough to see past physical barriers to the soul that beat beneath them, strong enough to choose connection over convention, strong enough to prove that fairy tales could survive in the real world. She had no way of knowing that 3 miles away, Mark was lying awake in his hotel room, staring at the same ceiling, wondering if the woman who had stolen his heart would be brave enough to take the greatest risk of both their lives, the risk of being known completely and loved anyway. Chapter 4. Letters from a Stranger. Hope is a dangerous thing, It makes cowards out of the brave and heroes out of the broken, and sometimes it arrives in the hands of a 10-year-old boy carrying $20 and a stranger's heart. Linda stared at the letter until the words blurred together, until Mark's handwriting became a map to a destination she was too terrified to reach. Bell Rock, 6 p.m. tomorrow. The coordinates of a collision between dream and reality that could either complete her or destroy her entirely. She didn't go. At 6:01 p.m. the next day, while Mark stood among the red rocks of Sedona, watching the sunset alone, Linda sat in her apartment with the letter pressed against her chest, tears streaming down her face as she chose safety over possibility. The coward in her whispered that some dreams were too beautiful to risk losing, that some love was better preserved in memory than destroyed by truth. The same boy appeared at her door the next morning, this time carrying 2 envelopes and a look of curiosity that suggested he was beginning to piece together the romance unfolding through his delivery service. "The man says you didn't come yesterday," the boy said, holding out the envelopes with the solemnity of someone entrusted with state secrets. "He gave me $40 this time and said to tell you that he's not giving up. He seems really nice, lady, and really sad." The child's honesty cut through her defenses like a blade. Even a 10-year-old could see what she was doing, breaking the heart of someone who loved her, punishing them both for her fear. Linda's hands shook as she opened the first letter, Mark's penmanship somehow even more beautiful in his desperation. "Linda, I waited until the stars came out, hoping you'd change your mind, hoping that maybe you were just running late or had gotten lost finding the place. I understand fear. I've lived with it my entire life, afraid that no one would ever love the man behind the money, afraid that I was fundamentally unworthy of the kind of love that transforms people from the inside out, that makes them better versions of themselves. But I'm not afraid of you, beautiful voice. I'm not afraid of whatever you think might scare me away, whatever secret you're carrying that makes you believe you're not worthy of love. I've fallen in love with your mind, your heart, your soul that shines through every word you speak. I've fallen in love with the way you laugh at my terrible jokes, the way you describe rain like poetry that makes me see the world through artists' eyes, the way you find hope in the most ordinary moments and make them feel like miracles. I'll be at Bell Rock again tonight, same time, same place. I'll wait as long as it takes, as long as there's even the smallest chance that you might find the courage to let me love you the way you deserve to be loved. All my love, Mark." The second envelope contained a single photograph. Mark standing against the red rocks, tall and handsome and heartbreakingly real. He had kind eyes and a smile that was sad around the edges, the face of a man who'd learned to guard his heart, but was choosing vulnerability anyway. He looked like someone she could love completely, someone who might love her back if she was brave enough to let him try. The image made him human in ways that his voice alone couldn't convey, showed her the man who waited for her with patience that felt like worship. But bravery felt impossible when she imagined his face changing from hope to disappointment, from love to pity, from desire to duty. She didn't go that night either. The third letter arrived with a sense of finality that made her stomach clench with dread. "My beautiful mystery. I don't know what's holding you back, but I need you to know that I'm not giving up. I can't give up. What we found together doesn't come along twice in a lifetime. I've been thinking about what you said once, that you wished we could meet but feared reality might not live up to the magic. But Linda, the magic isn't just in our conversations. The magic is in you. It's in the woman who finds hope in thunderstorms, who creates beauty from nothing, who made a lonely man remember what it feels like to be alive. Tomorrow is my last night here. If you don't come, I'll have to accept that some love stories are meant to remain unfinished. But I want you to know that even if I never see your face, even if this is goodbye, loving you has been the most real thing I've ever experienced. Tomorrow night, Bell Rock, 6 p.m. This is my heart's last chance to find its home. Forever yours, no matter what. Mark. Linda read the letter until she'd memorized every word, until his desperation became her own, until the weight of his love and her fear collided in her chest, like storms meeting over open water. That night, she didn't sleep. She sat in her wheelchair by the window, staring out at the darkness, imagining Mark in Sedona doing the same thing. She thought about her mother, who used to say that life wasn't about avoiding heartbreak, but about deciding which chances were worth the risk of breaking your heart over. At 3 a.m., she made a phone call to a medical transport service. At 4 a.m., she picked out her best dress, a deep blue that brought out her eyes, the kind of dress her mother would have chosen. At 5 a.m., she sat in front of her mirror, braiding her hair with hands that wouldn't stop shaking, applying makeup with the care of someone preparing for either a wedding or a funeral. At 2 p.m., she was in the van, making the 2-hour drive to Sedona, her heart hammering a rhythm that sounded like prayers and promises and the kind of terror that comes right before the most important moment of your life. The van's radio played love songs that seemed written specifically for this moment, and Linda found herself humming along, her voice mixing with the melodies as the red rocks grew larger on the horizon. With every mile, she felt pieces of her fear falling away, replaced by something that felt dangerously like hope. She thought about Mark's letters, about the man who'd waited for her 3 nights running, who'd seen something in her worth crossing the country for. Maybe, just maybe, she was worth the risk after all. As the van pulled into Sedona and the afternoon light turned the rocks to fire, Linda Garcia took the deepest breath of her life and chose love over fear, truth over safety, and the terrifying possibility that some fairy tales might actually be strong enough to survive the real world. Chapter 5. When Hearts Collide. There are moments that divide a life into before and after, when the universe holds its breath and 2 souls recognize each other across the space between fear and forever. The rain had not been part of Mark's plan. He'd imagined their first meeting bathed in golden Arizona sunlight, with the red rocks of Sedona providing a backdrop worthy of the moment when his carefully constructed world would either expand to include everything he'd ever wanted or collapse under the weight of disappointed hope. Instead, he stood beneath a darkening sky, drops of water turning his expensive shirt transparent, and his perfectly styled hair into a disaster that his stylist would weep over. But as the storm gathered strength above Bell Rock, Mark realized that rain was perfect for this moment, raw and honest and impossible to control, washing away pretense and leaving only truth in its wake. At 5:45 p.m., 15 minutes before their appointed meeting, he was alone. At 5:50, still alone, but refusing to acknowledge the whisper of doubt that suggested she might not come. At 5:55, soaked to the skin and shivering despite Arizona's warmth, but holding on to faith like a lifeline. At 6:07 p.m., he heard the sound that would change his life forever. The quiet whir of wheels on wet pavement, growing closer with each heartbeat that thundered in his chest. Mark turned, his heart hammering against his ribs with anticipation and terror in equal measure, and saw her. Linda Garcia, the woman who had owned his dreams for 3 weeks, approaching in a wheelchair with rain streaming down her face like tears and the most beautiful, terrified expression he'd ever seen. She was breathtaking in ways that had nothing to do with conventional beauty and everything to do with the courage radiating from every line of her body. Her dark hair was soaked and clinging to her shoulders. Her dress, a deep blue that brought out the gold flecks in her eyes, was wet from the storm, but she held herself with a grace that made his breath catch. This was the voice he'd fallen in love with, given form, the laugh that had sustained him through lonely nights, made manifest in a woman so beautiful and real that for a moment he wondered if he was dreaming. For a moment that felt like hours, they simply looked at each other, the rain creating a curtain of privacy around them, while the red rocks of Sedona provided a backdrop worthy of the most important scene of both their lives. Mark took in her delicate features, the way her hands gripped her wheelchair's armrests with white-knuckled nervousness, the vulnerability and hope warring in her expression. She was ethereally beautiful, but it was more than that. She was real, finally, gloriously real, and the woman he'd fallen in love with through phone lines and whispered confessions was somehow even more magnificent than his imagination had dared to hope. Linda saw a man who looked exactly like the voice she'd memorized, kind eyes that crinkled at the corners with the same warmth she'd heard in his laughter, strong hands that she'd imagined holding hers during their longest conversations, a face that was handsome, but more importantly, honest, open, devastatingly familiar, despite being seen for the first time. Rain had darkened his hair, and his expensive shirt clung to his frame, but what struck her most was the way he looked at her, not with curiosity or pity, but with recognition, as if he was seeing someone he'd been searching for his entire life. She also saw the moment of surprise that flickered across his features when he fully registered the wheelchair, the split second where his mind adjusted from expectation to reality. Her heart stopped, waiting for the inevitable change in his expression, the disappointment that would creep in as he realized what he'd gotten himself into. This was it, the moment she'd feared, when he would step back, make excuses, find a way to let her down gently while the love died in his eyes like a candle being snuffed out. Instead, Mark stepped forward, closing the distance between them with purposeful strides that splashed through puddles without care for his expensive shoes. "Linda," he said, her name a prayer on his lips, and his voice was exactly as she remembered, warm and deep and full of wonder, but now she could see the way his eyes softened when he spoke her name, the way his whole face transformed with joy at finally being able to match a face to the voice that had become his reason for living. "I'm sorry I didn't come before," she whispered, rain and tears making her words soft and broken. "I was scared." "Of what?" He moved closer, close enough that she could see water droplets clinging to his eyelashes like diamonds, close enough to feel the warmth radiating from his body despite the cool rain, close enough to see that his eyes weren't just green, but flecked with gold that matched the late afternoon light filtering through the storm clouds. "Of this. Of disappointing you. Of not being what you expected." Her voice cracked on the last word, and she looked down at her hands twisted in her lap, at the wheelchair that had defined so much of her adult life, at all the ways she was different from the women he could have chosen, women who could run to meet him, who could stand for their first kiss, who could dance without thinking about balance and support and the thousand small accommodations that love would require. Mark knelt in the red mud without hesitation, his expensive suit forgotten as if it were the most natural thing in the world, bringing himself to her eye level with movements that spoke of a man who understood that true connection happened between souls, not bodies. His hands, when he reached out to gently lift her chin, were steady and warm, and completely unafraid. "Linda Garcia," he said, his voice steady despite the emotion threatening to overwhelm him, despite the way his heart was hammering against his ribs with the force of recognition and rightness and love that felt bigger than his body could contain. "You are exactly what I expected, and so much more than I dared to hope for." The words were simple, but they carried the weight of every conversation they'd shared, every laugh they'd exchanged, every moment when his voice had made her feel beautiful and whole and worthy of the kind of love that transforms people from the inside out. "But I can't," she began, gesturing helplessly at her wheelchair, at all the things she couldn't do, all the ways she was different from other women he could have chosen, all the limitations that seemed so overwhelming when faced with the reality of a man who could have anyone and had somehow chosen her. "You can't what?" Mark's eyes never left hers, green depths that held no pity, no disappointment, only a love so pure and complete it took her breath away. "You can't make me laugh until my sides hurt. You can't inspire me with your art and your beautiful way of seeing the world. You can't love me with a heart so generous it taught me what I was missing my entire life." The rain fell harder, but neither of them noticed anything beyond this moment of perfect recognition. The world had narrowed to just this. Mark kneeling in the mud with his expensive suit forgotten, Linda's face turned up to his, with rain mingling with tears of joy, and the space between them crackling with the electricity of two souls finally finding their home in each other. This was what love looked like when it transcended every barrier society could construct, when it chose connection over convention, when it proved that the heart sees what the eyes cannot. "I love you," Mark said, the words simple and earth-shattering. "I love your voice and your laugh and your brilliant mind. I love the way you describe thunderstorms and the way you make me feel like the best version of myself. I love your courage and your art, and the fact that you're sitting here in the rain being braver than I've ever been in my entire life." "Mark," she breathed, his name carrying 3 weeks of longing and a lifetime of hope she'd never dared to feel. "I love you," he repeated, reaching out to touch her face with fingers that trembled with reverence. "All of you. Every part of you. The wheelchair doesn't change anything, Linda. It's just how you get around. What matters is what's in here." He placed his hand gently over her heart. "And what's in there is the most beautiful thing I've ever known." The sob that escaped her was joy and relief and wonder, all mixed together. "I love you too," she whispered. "I've loved you since that first phone call when you described the rain on the red rocks. I just never thought..." "Never thought what?" "Never thought anyone could love me like this. Completely. Without wanting to fix me or change me or wish I was different." Mark's answer was to lean forward and kiss her, soft and gentle and full of promise. Their first kiss happened in a rainstorm in Arizona, with mud on his knees and tears on her cheeks, and it was perfect in every way that mattered. When they finally broke apart, Mark rested his forehead against hers. "There's something I need to tell you," he said. "Something I should have mentioned before." Linda's heart clenched. "What?" I have more money than I let on. A lot more. I was afraid you'd think differently of me if you knew." She stared at him for a moment, then started laughing. Not the bitter laugh of disappointment, but the bright, joyous laugh he'd fallen in love with over the phone. "You were afraid I'd think differently of you because you're rich?" she asked, incredulous. "It changes things, changes how people see me, what they want from me." "Mark Ellison," she said, cupping his rain-soaked face in her hands. "I fell in love with your heart, not your bank account. Money doesn't make you less worthy of love. It just makes you more capable of doing beautiful things with it." A small crowd had gathered to watch them, tourists and locals drawn by the cinematic beauty of two people finding each other in the storm. Someone started clapping, and soon the entire group was applauding their love story unfolding in real time. Mark stood and moved behind Linda's wheelchair, leaning down to speak in her ear. "What do you say we give them something to really applaud?" Before she could ask what he meant, he was kneeling again, this time pulling a small velvet box from his soaked jacket pocket. "Linda Garcia," he said, his voice carrying across the gathered crowd. "I know this is crazy. I know we've only just met face to face. But I also know that some love is too big for cautious timing and careful planning. I love you with everything I am, and I want to love you for the rest of my life. Will you marry me?" The crowd gasped. Linda stared at the ring, a simple, perfect diamond surrounded by smaller stones that caught what little light filtered through the storm clouds. "Yes," she whispered. Then, louder, with a joy that could have powered the entire state of Arizona, "Yes!" The crowd erupted in cheers as Mark slipped the ring onto her finger and kissed her again, and if there was magic in the world, it was concentrated in that moment when two hearts that had found each other across impossible odds finally came home. As the rain began to slow and the red rocks emerged from the storm like ancient witnesses to their love, Mark and Linda knew they had crossed a threshold from which there was no return, and neither of them wanted to go back anyway. Chapter 6. New York, New Life. Love, when it's real, doesn't just change two people. It transforms every space they inhabit, turning houses into homes and strangers into family, creating magic from the most mundane moments of shared existence. The elevator ride to Mark's penthouse felt like ascending into someone else's dream, each floor carrying them further from the ordinary world and closer to a life that still felt too beautiful to be real. Linda watched the numbers climb, 20, 30, 40, her hand intertwined with Mark's, the weight of her engagement ring both foreign and perfect on her finger. Through the glass elevator walls, New York City spread out beneath them like a glittering promise, millions of lights that seemed to pulse with the same rhythm as her racing heart. She couldn't quite believe this was her life now, that the lonely woman who'd answered a wrong number just months ago was ascending to a penthouse with a man who looked at her like she held the secrets to every happiness he'd ever wanted. The elevator itself was a marvel, floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a preview of the spectacular views awaiting them, controls positioned at the perfect height for someone in a wheelchair, details that spoke of thoughtfulness rather than retrofitting. Mark had clearly spent time ensuring every aspect of their life together would be seamless, comfortable, designed around love rather than limitation. "Nervous?" Mark asked, squeezing her hand gently, his thumb tracing familiar circles on her skin that had become his signature comfort. "Terrified," Linda admitted, then smiled with the honesty that had become one of the foundations of their relationship. But the good kind of terrified. Like standing at the edge of a cliff, knowing you can fly, knowing that the fall might be the most beautiful thing that's ever happened to you. The elevator opened directly into his apartment, because of course it did, and Linda's breath caught in her throat at the sheer magnificence of the space. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of Central Park that looked like a living painting, the space decorated with clean lines and expensive furniture that somehow still managed to feel warm rather than sterile. Art graced the walls, not the cold investment pieces she'd expected, but paintings and photographs that spoke of personal taste, of a man who understood beauty in all its forms. But what struck her most was how empty it felt, despite its beauty, like a gorgeous museum exhibit waiting for visitors who would make it come alive with laughter and arguments and the beautiful messiness of actual living. The space was pristine, professionally decorated, undeniably spectacular, and utterly without soul. It was the home of a man who'd focused so completely on building success that he'd forgotten to build a life. "Mark, it's incredible," she said, rolling forward to take it all in, her wheels silent on expensive hardwood that gleamed like honey in the afternoon light. "It's been a museum for the past 5 years," he said, watching her reaction carefully, noting the way she moved through the space with an artist's eye for detail. Beautiful to look at, professionally photographed for magazines, perfect for impressing business associates, but not really lived in. I keep thinking how different it'll be with you here, how your art will transform these walls, how your laughter will make these rooms feel like home instead of a showcase. That's when she noticed the modifications, changes so seamlessly integrated into the existing design that they looked intentional rather than retrofitted. A ramp leading to the living area where there had obviously been steps before, the incline so gentle it seemed like a natural part of the architecture. Lowered light switches and countertops in the kitchen that had been redesigned to accommodate her height without sacrificing style. Door handles changed to levers instead of knobs throughout the apartment, a detail so small but so meaningful because it showed he'd thought about every aspect of her daily life. "You did all this for me?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Mark's cheeks colored slightly. "I may have made a few calls while you were packing in Phoenix. I wanted you to feel at home here. Not like you were living in someone else's space." Linda felt tears prick her eyes. Every man she'd ever dated, the few who'd bothered, had either ignored her wheelchair entirely or treated it like a problem to be solved. Mark was the first to see it as simply part of who she was, something to accommodate naturally rather than begrudge or pity. "Show me everything," she said. For the next hour, Mark gave her the tour like an excited child showing off his favorite toy. He'd had the master bathroom redesigned with a roll-in shower and grab bars disguised as towel holders. The bed could be adjusted to different heights with the touch of a button. Even the art studio he'd created for her had been designed with accessibility in mind. Adjustable easels, supplies within easy reach, lighting that could be modified for any project. "I may have gotten a little carried away," he admitted as they finished the tour in her new studio. "If anything doesn't work or needs to be changed." Linda rolled to the center of the room and spun in a slow circle, taking in the north-facing windows, the organized supplies, the easel positioned perfectly for her height. It was more than she'd ever dreamed of having, not just the equipment, but the thoughtfulness behind every detail. "It's perfect," she said. "You're perfect." "I'm really not," Mark said, moving to stand behind her chair, his hands resting gently on her shoulders. "But I love you enough to want to be." Their first dinner in the apartment was take-out Chinese food eaten on the living room floor, Linda sitting in her wheelchair while Mark sprawled beside her, both of them talking over each other in their excitement to share everything they'd never been able to say over the phone. "Tell me about your family," Linda said, twirling lo mein around her chopsticks with the skill of someone who'd eaten too many solo dinners. Mark's expression grew complicated. "My parents are good people, but distant. They had me late in life, already set in their ways. When I showed an aptitude for business, they were proud, but it always felt like they loved my achievements more than me. My sister Emma is different, though. You'll love her." "Will they like me?" The vulnerability in her question made Mark's heart clench. He set down his food and turned to face her fully. "Linda, my parents have met every woman I've dated in the past 10 years. Socialites, models, women who looked perfect on paper and left them impressed but cold. You're the first woman I've ever brought home who they'll see me actually light up around. They're going to love you because I love you and because loving me has made me someone worth loving." She was quiet for a moment, processing. "I keep waiting for the other shoe to drop," she admitted, "for you to wake up and realize what you've gotten yourself into." Mark moved from the floor to kneel beside her chair, taking her hands in his. "Linda Garcia, let me tell you what I've gotten myself into. I've gotten myself into a life where I wake up excited about the day ahead. I've gotten myself into conversations that matter, laughter that heals, love that makes me braver than I've ever been. I've gotten myself into the greatest adventure of my life. Even though I come with complications, everyone comes with complications. Yours just happened to have wheels. That night, as they lay in Mark's king-sized bed, adjusted to the perfect height for Linda to transfer from her wheelchair, she stared at the ceiling and marveled at how quickly her entire world had transformed. "Mark," she whispered into the darkness. Thank you." "For what?" "For seeing me, all of me. For making me feel beautiful instead of broken." He rolled onto his side, finding her in the darkness, his hand coming up to cup her cheek. "You were never broken, love. You were just waiting for someone with eyes clear enough to see you properly." The next morning brought their first real test, meeting Mark's family. Emma Ellison arrived like a hurricane of enthusiasm and designer clothes, sweeping into the apartment with the confidence of someone who'd never met a stranger she couldn't charm. "So you're the famous Linda," Emma said, settling onto the couch across from where Linda sat in her chair, Mark hovering nervously nearby. "The woman who managed to make my workaholic brother remember he's actually human." "That's me," Linda replied, unsure whether she was being evaluated or welcomed. "Good," Emma said decisively. "He needed humanizing. Tell me, are you planning to keep him, or can I still auction him off to the highest bidder?" Linda looked at Mark, who was trying not to laugh, then back at Emma. "I think I'll keep him. He's house-trained and everything." Emma threw back her head and laughed with genuine delight. "Oh, I like you already." "Mark, you may actually have gotten this one right." When Mark's parents arrived an hour later, the atmosphere grew more formal. Richard and Patricia Ellison were exactly what Linda had expected. Elegant, reserved, the kind of people who measured words like precious commodities. But as the afternoon wore on, she watched them watching Mark, and she saw the exact moment when they realized their son had become someone they'd never seen before. "You've made him happy," Patricia said quietly to Linda, as they stood together in the kitchen, Mark and his father deep in conversation about some business matter. "He makes me happy too." "That's not what I mean." Patricia's eyes were sharp, but not unkind. "I mean, you've made him happy in a way we never could. He lights up when he looks at you. In 42 years, I've never seen my son light up." The approval in her voice was subtle, but unmistakable, and Linda felt a knot she hadn't realized was there loosen in her chest. That evening, after everyone had gone and they were alone again in their apartment, Mark found Linda in her studio, sketching by the window as the sun set over Central Park. "What are you drawing?" he asked, settling into the chair he'd placed there for moments like this. "Us," she said, turning the pad so he could see. "That first day in Sedona, I want to remember exactly how it felt when you knelt in the rain and told me you loved me." Mark studied the sketch. Their faces turned toward each other, the rain rendered in careful strokes, the joy and wonder and relief captured in expressions that were somehow both realistic and larger than life. "It's beautiful," he said, "but you got one thing wrong." "What?" He reached over and took the pencil from her hand, adding a few careful strokes to the drawing. When he handed it back, he'd drawn their joined hands, their rings catching the light, the moment when they'd chosen each other completely and forever. "There," he said. "Now, it's perfect." As they sat together in their home, truly their home now, watching the city sparkle to life below them, both Mark and Linda knew they had successfully crossed the bridge from separate lives to shared future, and the view from the other side was more beautiful than either had dared to imagine. Chapter 7. Hope and Healing. Sometimes the greatest act of love is not accepting someone as they are, but believing in who they might become, and having the courage to take the journey together. The medical office smelled like disinfectant and hope, a combination that made Linda's stomach flutter with equal parts anticipation and terror. She'd been in too many medical facilities over the years, subjected to too many consultations that ended with apologetic shrugs and gentle explanations of why nothing more could be done. But Dr. Rebecca Thompson's office was different from the sterile medical facilities she remembered from childhood. Warm wood furniture, plants on the windowsills, certificates and awards that spoke of expertise without intimidation, family photos that suggested this doctor understood life existed beyond medical charts. The walls displayed before and after photos of patients who'd undergone various procedures, stories of triumph that both inspired and terrified her. Some showed people learning to walk again after accidents. Others celebrated smaller victories, the ability to stand, to take a few assisted steps, to reclaim pieces of physical independence they'd thought were lost forever. Mrs. Garcia to be, Dr. Thompson said with a smile that crinkled her eyes, extending a hand that was both professional and genuinely warm. I've reviewed your files extensively, and I have to say, your case is fascinating from a medical perspective. Mark reached for Linda's hand, their fingers interlacing automatically in the gesture that had become as natural as breathing over their 3 months of living together. The familiar contact carried extra weight today, an anchor in the storm of possibilities and fears, a reminder that whatever they learned in this room, they would face it together. His thumb traced gentle circles on the back of her hand, a silent message of support that steadied her racing heart. Fascinating good or fascinating bad? Linda asked, trying for lightness. Fascinating hopeful, Dr. Thompson replied, pulling up Linda's MRI images on a large monitor. Your injury was severe, no question, but you were 10 years old when it happened, and medicine has advanced significantly in the past 12 years. More importantly, your body has done something remarkable. She pointed to the images, explaining in language they could understand how Linda's young body had created new neural pathways around the damaged areas, how her muscles had maintained more tone than typically seen in cases like hers, how recent advances in surgical techniques had opened possibilities that hadn't existed even 5 years ago. What are you saying? Mark asked, his voice carefully controlled. I'm saying there's a chance, not a guarantee, but a real chance that we could restore some function. Maybe not complete mobility, but potentially enough for you to walk with assistance. The words hung in the air like a held breath. Linda stared at the images of her spine, seeing for the first time not just damage, but possibility. What would the surgery involve? She asked. Dr. Thompson spent the next hour explaining the procedure with the thoroughness of someone who understood that hope required complete honesty to be sustainable. The surgery was complex, she explained, involving multiple stages of delicate work on her spinal cord that would require a team of specialists working in perfect coordination. It was risky, with potential complications that could range from infection to paralysis that could be worse than her current condition. The rehabilitation would be months of intensive, often painful work, with no guarantees about the final outcome. The success rate was encouraging, but not overwhelming. Roughly 65% of patients experienced some improvement in mobility, though improvement could mean anything from increased sensation to the ability to walk short distances with assistance. Only about 30% regained the ability to walk independently, and even then, most required mobility aids for longer distances or during times of fatigue. I need to be completely clear about something, Dr. Thompson said, her voice carrying the weight of years spent delivering both miracles and disappointments. This surgery is not about fixing you, because you are not broken. You've adapted beautifully to your circumstances and built a full, meaningful life. This is about expanding possibilities, if that's what you want, if the potential benefits outweigh the very real risks for you personally. The words hung in the air like a challenge and a gift simultaneously. Linda had spent 12 years being told by well-meaning people that she was brave for living her life, that she was inspiring for not giving up, as if simply existing in a wheelchair was some kind of heroic act. Dr. Thompson was the first medical professional to acknowledge that she wasn't a problem that needed solving, but a whole person considering her options. In the elevator down to the parking garage, Linda was quiet, processing. "What are you thinking?" Mark asked. "I'm thinking about the word if," she said. "I've spent 12 years learning to live without if. Learning to find happiness and purpose and love exactly as I am. And I have, haven't I? Found those things?" "You have. We have. So why do I want this so badly it scares me?" Mark was quiet for a long moment. "Maybe because wanting to grow and change and reach for more doesn't mean you're not grateful for what you have. Maybe it means you're human." That night, they lay in bed talking until dawn, working through fears and hopes and practical considerations that felt both monumental and surprisingly manageable when shared between two people who'd learned to navigate life's challenges together. "What if it doesn't work?" Linda whispered in the darkness, her voice small and vulnerable in ways that made Mark's heart clench with protective tenderness. "Then we'll still be us. Still be happy. Still be in love with a future full of possibilities that have nothing to do with walking." His voice was steady, certain, the bedrock of faith she could build her courage upon. What if it does work? The question carried equal weight, because success meant change, and change was terrifying even when it promised improvement. "Then we'll dance at our wedding," Mark said simply, and the image was so beautiful it brought tears to her eyes. "But Linda, I need you to understand something that I don't think I've made clear enough. I fell in love with you exactly as you are. If you never take another step, if things stay exactly as they are right now, I will spend every day for the rest of my life grateful that a wrong number brought me the perfect woman for me." She turned in his arms, finding his face in the darkness, tracing the features she'd memorized by touch. "Mark, I need you to understand something too. I'm not doing this for you. I'm not doing this so I can be the wife you deserve or so I can be normal or acceptable or any of those things that society tells women like me we should strive for." He captured her hand against his cheek, pressing a kiss to her palm. "Good. Because I don't want you to do this for me. I want you to do it for you, if you do it at all. I want you to chase every dream that lives in your heart, explore every possibility that calls to your spirit, not because you think you need to earn love, but because you deserve to see what you're capable of achieving." "I think I want to try," she said, "not because I need to walk to be complete, but because I want to see what I'm capable of. I want to push the boundaries of what's possible. Then we'll do it together." The next few weeks were a whirlwind of additional consultations, second opinions, insurance battles that Mark's resources made easier but not simple. Through it all, their families rallied around them with support that sometimes overwhelmed Linda with its intensity. Emma appointed herself chief researcher, arriving at the apartment with stacks of medical journals and success stories from similar cases. Mark's parents, in their reserved way, made it clear they were prepared to provide whatever resources might be needed. Even Linda's father called from Phoenix, his voice thick with emotion he rarely showed. "Misha," he said, using the pet name he hadn't called her since before her mother died, "I want you to know how proud I am. Your mother would be proud too." The mention of her mother broke something loose in Linda's chest. "I wish she could be here for this." "She is here," her father said firmly. "She's in your courage, your strength, your refusal to settle for less than everything life can offer you." The surgery was scheduled for a Tuesday in October, when the leaves in Central Park were turning colors that reminded Linda of the Arizona sunsets where her love story had begun. The night before the procedure, She and Mark sat in her studio, surrounded by paintings she'd created over the past few months, portraits of hope and fear, abstracts that captured the emotional landscape of preparing for the unknown. "Are you ready?" Mark asked. "No," she said honestly, "but I'm going to do it anyway. That's the definition of brave." "I keep thinking about that first phone call," Linda said, putting down her brush and turning to face him. "How I almost hung up when you asked for the pottery studio. What would have happened if I had? But you didn't." "No, I didn't. I took a chance on a wrong number, and it changed my entire life. Maybe tomorrow is another wrong number that turns out to be exactly right." They made love that night with extra tenderness, extra reverence, as if they were memorizing each other before a long journey, which, in a way, they were. The morning of the surgery, as they sat in the pre-op area surrounded by medical professionals preparing for an 8-hour procedure, Linda looked at Mark and saw her own mixture of terror and hope reflected in his eyes. "Whatever happens," she said, "promise me something. Anything. Promise me we'll still be us. That if I can walk, you won't love me more. And if I can't, you won't love me less." Mark leaned down and kissed her forehead, soft and sure. "Linda Garcia, I promise you that my love isn't conditional on what your legs can do. I fell in love with your heart, your mind, your soul. Everything else is just details." As they wheeled her toward the operating room, Linda closed her eyes and thought about phone calls and rainstorms, about love that transcends physical limitations, about the difference between being broken and being ready for transformation. 8 hours later, she would wake up to Mark's face and Dr. Thompson's cautiously optimistic smile, and the long journey toward discovering what was possible would begin in earnest. Chapter 8. Steps of Faith. Recovery is not a destination but a journey, measured not in miles but in moments of triumph over the voice that whispers impossible, in the daily choice to believe that better days are worth fighting for. The physical therapy gym smelled like sweat and determination, antiseptic and dreams, filled with the sounds of people pushing against their limitations one repetition at a time, grunts of effort, encouraging words from therapists, the soft whir of machines designed to rebuild what life had torn down. Linda had been coming here every day for 3 months since her surgery, and the space had become as familiar as her own apartment. More familiar in some ways, since this was where she was slowly, painstakingly rebuilding herself from the inside out, discovering muscles she'd forgotten existed and nerves that were learning to sing again after years of silence. The walls were covered with before and after photos of patients who'd undergone similar journeys, testimonials to the power of stubborn hope and relentless work. Some showed dramatic transformations, others celebrated smaller victories that were no less meaningful. Each image was a reminder that recovery looked different for everyone, that success couldn't be measured by anyone's standards except her own. "Remember, we're not racing anyone," said Marcus, her physical therapist, a man whose patience seemed infinite and whose faith in the human bodies to heal had become Linda's lifeline during the darkest days of her recovery. He was built like a linebacker, but moved with the gentleness of someone who understood that healing required both strength and tenderness. "We're building strength, building connection, building trust between your brain and your legs. Every day is different. Every session teaches us something new about what's possible." Linda gripped the parallel bars, sweat already beading on her forehead from the effort of simply standing upright, her legs trembling with the unfamiliar weight of supporting her body after 12 years of relying on wheels. 3 months ago, she couldn't feel anything below her waist except phantom sensations that taunted her with memories of movement. Now, sensation was returning in unpredictable waves, sometimes a tingle that felt like champagne bubbles under her skin, sometimes actual feeling that made her gasp with wonder, sometimes phantom sensations that made her think she could move more than she actually could. "I feel them today," she said, concentrating on the muscles in her right leg. "It's different than yesterday." Mark watched from his usual chair in the corner, laptop forgotten, his entire attention focused on his fiancée as she worked with an intensity that took his breath away. Every day for 3 months, he'd sat in that chair, watching her push herself past what seemed possible, celebrating victories measured in millimeters and mourning setbacks that would have broken a lesser spirit. "Good," Marcus said. "Now let's see what happens when you try to shift your weight." The first month after surgery had been the hardest. Linda had emerged from the 8-hour procedure groggy but hopeful, Dr. Thompson's cautious optimism ringing in her ears. But hope had to be tempered with reality, the swelling, the pain, the long weeks of healing before they could even begin to assess whether the surgery had been successful. Patience had become Mark's most used word, whispered to Linda during the dark nights when pain kept her awake, repeated to himself when he wanted to demand faster progress, better results, immediate transformation. But gradually, impossibly, things began to change. First, sensation returned to her toes, the strangest, most wonderful feeling of her adult life. Then, slowly, patches of feeling spread up her legs like sunlight creeping across a floor. Not complete sensation, not normal, but undeniably there. "I can feel you touching my ankle," she'd whispered to Mark one evening as he massaged her feet, tears streaming down both their faces at this small miracle. Now, 6 months after surgery, Linda was standing upright, supporting most of her weight on her legs for the first time in 12 years. The achievement was monumental and terrifying and completely exhausting. "That's enough for today," Marcus said, noting the tremor in her legs that indicated muscle fatigue. "5 more minutes," Linda insisted, the same thing she said every day. "Linda," Mark said gently, knowing that tone, "you've made incredible progress. Don't push so hard you set yourself back." She looked at him, sweat-dampened hair clinging to her forehead, eyes bright with determination and frustration in equal measure. "I want to dance at our wedding, Mark. I want to walk down that aisle to you. I need 5 more minutes." Marcus looked between them, understanding the deeper conversation happening beneath the surface. "5 more minutes," he agreed. "But we listen to your body, okay? No heroics. Those 5 minutes yielded something extraordinary. As Linda concentrated with every fiber of her being, her right leg lifted slightly, then her left. Not steps exactly, but the beginning of steps. The muscle memory was there, buried but not destroyed, waiting for the right combination of healing and willpower to resurface. "Did you see that?" she gasped, looking between Mark and Marcus. "Did you see?" "I saw," Mark said, his voice thick with emotion. "I saw you taking your first steps toward our future." The drive home was quiet, both of them processing what had happened in the therapy session. Recovery wasn't linear. There had been good days and discouraging days, breakthrough moments and setbacks that left Linda sobbing in Mark's arms. But today felt different. Today felt like crossing a threshold. "Mark," Linda said as they pulled into their building's garage, "I need to tell you something." He parked and turned to face her, noting the serious expression that meant she'd been thinking deeply about something. "I've been afraid," she admitted, "not just of the surgery not working, but of it working too well." "What do you mean?" "I mean, I've been afraid that if I could walk again, you'd expect me to be someone different, that you'd want the woman who could walk instead of the woman you fell in love with." Mark reached across the console to take her hand. "Linda, listen to me. I fell in love with you sitting in a wheelchair in the rain, and I'll love you standing at our altar. I'll love you if you run marathons or if you never take another step. The woman I fell in love with is your courage, your humor, your brilliant mind, your generous heart. Those things don't change based on what your legs can do. Promise? Promise. That night, they lay in bed talking about wedding plans with a new sense of possibility. They'd been engaged for 6 months, taking things slowly while Linda recovered from surgery and adapted to her changing body. "Tell me again about the venue," Linda said, curled against Mark's side. "The garden at the conservatory, with the glass walls and the view of the park. You can walk down the aisle if you want to, or roll. Whatever feels right on the day." "I want to walk," she said firmly. "Even if it's just a few steps, even if I need help, I want to walk to you." "Then you will." 3 months later, Linda took her first unassisted steps. 5 steps from her wheelchair to Mark's waiting arms, but they might as well have been 5 miles for the joy they brought. Marcus cheered, other patients in the therapy gym applauded, and Mark swept her into his arms like she'd just conquered Everest. "I did it," she whispered against his neck. "I actually did it." "You did it," he confirmed, holding her tight. "You did the impossible." But the real breakthrough came 2 weeks later, when Linda was practicing at home. Mark was in his office taking a conference call when he heard her voice from the living room. "Mark! Mark, come here!" He found her standing by the window. No support, no assistance, just Linda Garcia standing on her own 2 feet, with tears streaming down her face and the most radiant smile he'd ever seen. "Look," she said, and took a step. Then another, walking across the room to fall into his arms. "My God," he breathed, holding her as she laughed and cried simultaneously. "Linda, my God." "We're going to dance at our wedding," she said against his chest. "We're really going to dance." And in that moment, surrounded by the impossible made possible, they both knew that some love stories are powerful enough to rewrite the rules of physics, medicine, and fate itself. As they held each other in their sun-filled apartment, both of them crying with joy and wonder, Linda and Mark understood that they had witnessed something greater than medical recovery. They had witnessed the power of love to transform not just hearts, but bodies, minds, and the very definition of what's possible when 2 people refuse to accept limitations on their forever. Chapter 9. Love's Promise. There comes a moment in every great love story when the future crystallizes into a single perfect question that will define everything that comes after. The engagement ring caught the morning light streaming through the windows of Tiffany & Company, sending rainbow prisms dancing across the display cases like scattered joy. Mark watched Linda's face as she tried on wedding bands, noting the way her eyes lit up at certain settings, the way her fingers moved with increasing confidence and grace as her recovery continued. There was something magical about this moment, choosing the symbol that would mark her as his wife, selecting the physical representation of promises they'd already made in their hearts. The store itself felt like a temple to love, with its elegant displays and hushed atmosphere that suggested every ring held the power to transform lives. Other couples moved through the space with the same sense of reverence, but Mark was certain that none of them had traveled the journey he and Linda had shared to reach this moment. "This one," she said, sliding a simple platinum band next to her engagement ring, with the careful precision of someone who knew exactly what she wanted. "It's perfect." Mark looked at the ring, elegant and understated, with small diamonds that complemented rather than competed with her engagement ring. It was exactly what he would have chosen for her, which still amazed him after 1.5 years of discovering how perfectly their tastes aligned, how naturally their dreams seemed to interweave. The simplicity spoke to both their personalities, the quality reflected their commitment to building something that would last a lifetime. "Are you sure?" he asked. though he could see the certainty in her eyes, the way she held her hand up to catch the light and smiled at the way the rings looked together. We can look at others. Price isn't an object. If there's something else that catches your eye, I'm sure. She smiled up at him, and he was struck again by how radiant she'd become over the past few months. The combination of recovering strength and growing excitement about their wedding had given her a glow that made her even more beautiful than she'd been the day he first saw her in the rain. It's not about the size or the sparkle. It's about what it represents, and this represents us, simple, elegant, strong enough to last forever. Excellent choice, said the sales associate, a woman named Margaret, who'd been patiently helping them for the past 2 hours. The simplicity of the band will allow your engagement ring to remain the focal point, and the platinum will wear beautifully over a lifetime. A lifetime. The words sent a thrill through Mark that never seemed to diminish, no matter how many times he thought about spending forever with Linda. As they walked through Central Park afterward, Linda using her wheelchair for longer distances, but standing and walking short stretches when her legs felt strong, Mark marveled at how completely his life had changed. 18 months ago, he'd been a lonely man with more money than meaning, going through the motions of a successful life that felt empty at its core. Now, walking beside the woman he loved while she narrated their surroundings like a personal tour guide, he understood what people meant when they talked about being truly alive. The cherry blossoms will be blooming when we get married, Linda said, pointing to the trees they passed. Can you imagine? It'll be like the whole city is celebrating with us. Their wedding was set for April 15th, just 3 months away. The planning had been a joy rather than a stress, both of them more focused on the meaning of the day than the elaborate details that seemed to consume other couples. Speaking of celebrating, Mark said, stopping beside a bench, there's something I want to give you. Linda looked puzzled as he pulled a small wrapped box from his jacket pocket. Mark, we just bought my wedding ring. What's this? Open it. Inside the box, nestled in black velvet, was a pendant on a delicate chain, a small, perfect diamond surrounded by tiny sapphires that caught the light like captured stars. Mark, it's beautiful, but it was your mother's, he said quietly. Linda's breath caught. What? I called your father, asked him if he had anything of hers that you might want to carry with you on our wedding day. He sent this. Mark's voice was gentle as he explained. He said she wore it on her wedding day, and he'd been saving it for you. Tears filled Linda's eyes as she lifted the pendant from the box. She remembered this necklace, remembered her mother wearing it on special occasions, remembered playing with it as a small child while her mother held her. He said something else, Mark continued. He said your mother would have loved me, not because I can provide for you, but because I see you the way she always saw you, as perfect exactly as you are. The sob that escaped Linda was part grief for the mother who wouldn't be there on her wedding day, and part overwhelming gratitude for the man who understood that some gestures matter more than any amount of money could ever express. Help me put it on, she whispered. Mark fastened the chain around her neck with gentle fingers, and when the pendant settled against her chest, it felt like a blessing from beyond. Thank you, she said, her voice thick with emotion. This means more to me than you could possibly know. I do know, he said, settling beside her on the bench, because love means paying attention to what matters most to the people we cherish. That afternoon, they had lunch with Emma and her husband David at their favorite restaurant overlooking the Hudson River. Emma had become not just Mark's sister, but Linda's closest friend in New York, the kind of confidant who could make her laugh until her sides hurt and offer wisdom that cut straight to the heart of any problem. So, final head count? Emma asked, consulting the notebook she'd appointed herself keeper of. 87, Linda replied. Small enough to feel intimate, big enough to include everyone who matters. Perfect. And you're sure about walking down the aisle? Linda's hand moved instinctively to touch the pendant at her throat. I'm sure. I've been practicing with my physical therapist. I can walk about 50 feet now without assistance, and the aisle is 43 feet. I measured. Of course you measured, David laughed. Most brides worry about flowers and photographers. You worry about distance calculations. I worry about not falling flat on my face in front of everyone we love, Linda corrected with a grin. You won't, Mark said with absolute certainty. But even if you did, I'd be there to catch you. That's what husbands are for. You're not my husband yet, Linda pointed out. Technicality, Mark replied, raising his wineglass. In every way that matters, I've been yours since the moment you didn't hang up the phone. That evening, they returned to their apartment to find a package waiting, the wedding invitations they'd designed together, combining Linda's artistic vision with Mark's desire for elegant simplicity. The result was breathtaking. Cherry blossom branches in watercolor across cream paper, their names scripted in gold calligraphy, the details of their celebration laid out like poetry. They're perfect, Mark said, running his finger across the raised lettering of their names. Mark Christopher Ellison and Linda Isabella Garcia. Mrs. Linda Ellison, she said experimentally. That's going to take some getting used to. You could keep Garcia, Mark said, or hyphenate, whatever makes you happy. Linda considered this. I think I want to be Mrs. Ellison. I want to share your name the way I want to share your life, completely. They spent the evening addressing invitations, their hands occasionally brushing as they worked, their conversation flowing between wedding details and dreams for their future that felt both immediate and eternal. The elegant stationery spread across their dining room table like promises waiting to be delivered, each envelope containing not just an invitation to their wedding, but a piece of their love story that would be shared with everyone who mattered to them. Mrs. Patterson will cry when she opens this, Linda said, addressing an invitation to her former art teacher who had encouraged her to pursue graphic design during the darkest days after her accident. Emma's going to frame hers, Mark replied, carefully writing his college roommate's address in the precise handwriting that matched his attention to detail in everything that mattered to him. The rhythm of their work was meditative, peaceful in the way that shared tasks could be when performed by two people who had learned to move through life as a team. Outside their apartment, the city hummed with its usual energy, but inside their space, time seemed suspended in the golden glow of anticipation. When they finished, they had a stack of elegant announcements ready to carry their love story to friends and family scattered across the country, colleagues from Mark's business world who had watched him transform from a driven but lonely man into someone who radiated contentment, Linda's art community friends who had witnessed her blossom from a talented but guarded woman into someone who embraced life with fearless joy. One more thing, Mark said as they prepared for bed. He pulled another small box from his dresser drawer, this one containing matching wedding bands, his in platinum to match hers. I wanted us to see them together, he said, sliding his ring onto his finger beside hers on her hand. What do you think? The rings looked perfect together, simple, elegant, symbolic of the love that had grown between them from that first accidental phone call. I think, Linda said, intertwining their ringed fingers, that we're ready to promise forever to each other. Are you nervous? About marrying you? Never. About walking down the aisle without falling? Absolutely terrified. Mark lifted their joined hands and kissed her knuckles gently. Then it's a good thing I'll be waiting at the end to catch you if you stumble. Promise. Promise. As they fell asleep that night, their hands still linked, both rings catching the moonlight streaming through their bedroom window, Mark and Linda dreamed of cherry blossoms and promises that would bind their hearts together for all the seasons yet to come. Chapter 10. Walking down the aisle. Some moments are so perfect they seem to exist outside of time, when the universe pauses to witness love in its purest, most triumphant form, when fairy tales prove they can survive the real world and emerge even more beautiful for having been tested. The morning of April 15th dawned with the kind of perfect spring weather that felt like nature's blessing on their love, as if the universe itself had conspired to create the ideal backdrop for their beginning. Cherry blossoms painted Central Park in shades of pink and white that seemed almost too beautiful to be real, their petals drifting on a gentle breeze that carried the promise of new beginnings and the sweet fragrance of hope fulfilled. In their apartment, Linda stood before the full-length mirror, in what had once been Mark's sterile guest bedroom, but was now lovingly transformed into her bridal suite, complete with flowers from their florist and champagne from friends who understood the magnitude of this day. The transformation of the space mirrored the transformation of their lives. What had once been unused and impersonal was now filled with meaning, purpose, love that had a physical presence. Wedding gifts were arranged on every surface, cards from people whose lives had been touched by their story, flowers that seemed to glow with their own inner light. Linda marveled at the woman looking back at her from the mirror, hardly recognizing the radiant bride who had taken the place of the lonely graphic designer who'd answered a wrong number 18 months ago. The intervening time felt both like a lifetime and like yesterday, packed with experiences that had transformed her from someone who merely survived into someone who thrived. The wedding dress had been custom designed by a team who understood that beauty came in all forms, created to accommodate her unique needs while making her feel like the princess every bride deserves to be. Flowing silk fell in elegant lines that would look beautiful whether she was standing or sitting, with delicate beading that caught the morning light like captured stars scattered across fabric that moved like liquid moonlight. Every detail had been chosen with love, from the way the bodice supported her as she practiced walking to the way the skirt would look as she moved down the aisle toward her forever. Her mother's necklace rested against her throat, and her grandmother's pearl earrings, another gift from her father, completed the ensemble. "You're ready," said Maria, the wedding coordinator Emma had insisted upon hiring. "Your hair is perfect, your makeup is flawless, and that dress, my goodness, you look like you stepped out of a fairy tale." Linda turned from side to side, watching the way the silk moved with her body. In 3 hours, she would walk down the aisle to marry the love of her life. The thought sent butterflies through her stomach and made her heart race with anticipation. "How are the legs feeling today?" asked Dr. Thompson, who had become not just her surgeon, but her friend over the past year, and had insisted on being present for this milestone. "Strong," Linda replied, and meant it. She'd been working with Marcus every day for 2 weeks, practicing the exact steps she'd take from the back of the ceremony space to Mark's waiting arms. 43 feet, approximately 57 steps. She could do it. She would do it. "Remember," Dr. Thompson said, "if you get tired or feel unsteady, there's no shame in pausing or accepting help. This is about celebrating your love, not proving anything to anyone." "I know," Linda said, "but I want to do this. I need to do this. For me, for Mark, for everyone who believed impossible things could happen." Meanwhile, in a suite on the other side of the venue, Mark was discovering that even the most successful businessman could be reduced to nervous energy by the prospect of marrying the woman of his dreams. His hands shook slightly as he adjusted his tie for the 10th time, and his best man, his college roommate James, was finding it highly entertaining. "You know she's going to say yes, right?" James teased. "I mean, you've been living together for over a year. She's not going to run away at the altar." "What if I cry?" Mark asked, ignoring the joke entirely. "What if I take one look at her and completely lose it?" "Then you cry," said Mark's father, Richard, who had surprised everyone by being more emotional about this wedding than anyone had expected. "Son, I've watched you with Linda for the past year and a half, and I've never seen you happier. If seeing your bride makes you cry, it just means you understand how lucky you are." "She's walking, Dad," Mark said, his voice filled with wonder, even though they'd discussed this countless times. "After 12 years in a wheelchair, she's walking down the aisle to marry me." "She's not walking down the aisle because she can," Richard replied wisely. "She's walking down the aisle because she wants to." "There's a difference, and understanding that difference is part of why you're the right man for her." At 2 p.m., guests began arriving at the conservatory garden, finding their seats among the cherry blossoms that had been incorporated into the wedding decor, as if nature itself had been consulted about the design. Emma directed traffic with military precision, ensuring everyone had programs, pointing out the best spots for photographs, making sure Mark's elderly grandmother had a comfortable chair with the perfect view. Linda's father arrived from Phoenix looking more emotional than she'd seen him since her mother's funeral. Carol, his wife, was with him, and for the first time, Linda saw genuine warmth in her stepmother's eyes. "Mija," her father whispered when he saw her, reverting to Spanish the way he always did when feelings overwhelmed him. "Tu mamá estaría tan orgullosa." "Your mother would be so proud." "She's here with us today," Linda replied, touching her mother's necklace. "I can feel her." At 3:30, the music began with the kind of ethereal beauty that made even the flowers seem to lean in to listen. The string quartet Mark had hired played a soft, romantic melody that seemed to make the very air shimmer with anticipation. Guests rose as Emma walked down the aisle as maid of honor, radiant in deep blue silk that complemented the spring setting perfectly. Her smile bright with joy for the brother who'd found his perfect match and the sister-in-law who'd become her dearest friend. The musicians had spent weeks preparing for this moment, understanding that they weren't just playing wedding music, but providing the soundtrack to a love story that had defied every expectation. Each note was chosen to honor the journey that had brought them here, from tentative phone conversations to this moment of ultimate commitment. Then came the moment everyone had been waiting for, the instant that would live in their memories long after the last champagne glass was empty and the final photograph was taken. The music changed to Pachelbel's Canon in D, and every head turned toward the back of the garden with expressions of wonder and anticipation. Mark, standing beneath an arch of white roses and cherry blossoms that seemed to glow in the afternoon light, felt his breath catch in his throat as he saw her. The sight hit him like a physical force, making his knees weak and his heart stutter with the magnitude of what he was witnessing. Linda stood at the entrance to the aisle, her arm linked through her father's, looking like every dream he'd ever had made manifest in silk and lace and determination that blazed like sunlight. The dress moved around her like liquid starlight. Her face glowed with joy and determination that made her more beautiful than any earthly creature had a right to be. And when their eyes met across the distance of 43 feet, the rest of the world simply disappeared. Time stopped, breath stopped, everything except the connection between their souls that had started with a wrong number and was about to be blessed by eternity. She took her first step, then another. The crowd held its collective breath as they watched this woman who had overcome impossible odds walk toward her future. Some guests knew the full story: the accident, the years of paralysis, the surgery, the months of rehabilitation. Others simply knew they were witnessing something extraordinary. Halfway down the aisle, Linda felt her legs begin to tremble with fatigue. For just a moment, doubt flickered across her face. The distance suddenly seemed enormous, her goal impossibly far away. Mark saw the hesitation immediately. Without breaking eye contact, he smiled. Not the polite smile of a groom posing for photos, but the wide, joyous, completely uninhibited smile that had first made her fall in love with his voice over the phone. That smile said everything. "You can do this. I believe in you. I'm here." The trembling stopped. Linda's steps became sure again. Her spine straightened with renewed determination, and she continued toward the man who had taught her that love could indeed work miracles. With 10 feet to go, she released her father's arm and walked the final steps alone. Not because she had to prove her independence, but because she wanted Mark to know that she was choosing him freely, completely, with every fiber of her being. When she reached the altar, Mark was indeed crying, tears streaming down his face as he whispered, "You did it. You're incredible. You're here." "I'm here," she confirmed, her own tears mixing with laughter. "Are you ready to marry me, Mr. Ellison?" "I've been ready since the moment you didn't hang up the phone, Mrs. Almost Ellison." The ceremony itself was a blur of perfect moments. They exchanged vows they'd written themselves, promises about loving each other through every challenge, supporting each other's dreams, believing in the impossible when they were together. When Mark slipped the ring onto Linda's finger, his hands were steady for the first time all day. When she placed his ring on his finger, her voice was strong and sure. "You may kiss your bride," said the officiant, and Mark didn't need to be told twice. Their first kiss as husband and wife happened surrounded by cherry blossoms and applause, witnessed by everyone who mattered to them, blessed by perfect spring sunshine and the kind of love that rewrites the rules about what's possible. But the moment that would live in everyone's memory forever came during their first dance. The band played "At Last" by Etta James, and as Mark led his wife onto the dance floor, every guest rose to their feet in spontaneous applause. Linda danced, not perfectly, not without occasional support from Mark's strong arms, but she danced. They swayed together, lost in each other's eyes, moving to music that seemed written specifically for this moment. "We did it," Mark whispered against her ear as they turned slowly under the lights. "We did," she agreed, "though I think this is just the beginning. The best kind of beginning." As the song ended and they were surrounded by family and friends eager to celebrate with them, Mark and Linda knew they had achieved something greater than a successful wedding. They had proven that love, when it's real and strong and patient, can overcome any obstacle the world puts in its path. Later, as the evening wound down and they prepared to leave for their honeymoon in Italy, Linda found herself standing at the edge of the garden, looking back at the scene of their perfect day. The lights twinkled like earthbound stars, the cherry blossom petals carpeted the ground like nature's confetti, and the lingering sounds of laughter and music created a symphony of joy that seemed to echo off the city buildings surrounding their celebration. Their guests were beginning to gather their things, faces glowing with the satisfaction of having witnessed something extraordinary. Children ran between the tables, collecting flower petals to throw as the bride and groom departed. Elderly relatives wiped tears from their eyes and spoke in hushed tones about the most beautiful wedding they'd ever seen. Friends hugged and made plans to see each other again soon, because events like this reminded everyone of what truly mattered in life. "Any regrets?" Mark asked, coming up behind her and wrapping his arms around her waist, his chin resting on top of her head, as they both took in the magical scene they'd created together. "Only one," she said, leaning back against his chest and feeling the steady rhythm of his heartbeat against her shoulder blades, the sound that had become her favorite music. "What's that?" "I wish we could do it all over again tomorrow, and the day after that, and every day for the rest of our lives." She turned in his arms, not caring that her wedding dress would wrinkle, not caring that photographers might capture this unguarded moment. "I wish I could marry you again every single day, choose you fresh every morning, say yes to forever as many times as there are stars in the sky." Mark laughed, the sound rich with happiness and promise, and the kind of contentment that comes from knowing you're exactly where you're supposed to be. "Well, Mrs. Ellison, we have the rest of our lives to create new perfect days. We have decades ahead of us to say yes to each other, to choose love over fear, to prove that fairy tales can survive in the real world and become even more beautiful for having been tested. Mrs. Ellison," she repeated, testing the sound of her new name. "I like the way that sounds." "I love the way it sounds," he corrected, turning her in his arms for another kiss. "Almost as much as I love you." As they kissed beneath the cherry blossoms, surrounded by the remnants of their perfect wedding day, both Mark and Linda understood that they had not just married each other. They had chosen to believe in magic, in second chances, in the power of love to transform not just hearts, but entire lives. Their love story had begun with a wrong number and a voice in the darkness. It would continue with shared dreams, mutual support, and the kind of partnership that makes both people stronger than they ever could have been alone. And sometimes, on perfect spring evenings when the cherry blossoms bloom in Central Park, you can still see them there, walking hand in hand, proving that the greatest love stories are not the ones that avoid obstacles, but the ones that transform obstacles into stepping stones toward forever.